Welcome back to TrueNAS Tech Talk. 25.10 is already over 55,000 systems, so that means it's time for our first major point release. Chris and I will detail some of the major fixes and improvements that'll be coming to your system next week. In November as well, Valve learned how to count to 3, so in honor of that, we'll not only discuss their hardware announcements and how they impact the Linux ecosystem, but we'll take a trio of viewer questions as well. Stick around. Well, welcome back, everybody. It's been quite a while. November kind of slipped away from us entirely after that first week. It's been a busy couple weeks for both Chris and myself. We had the supercomputing trade show in St. Louis. There was some travel out to the West Coast. There was Thanksgiving in the United States and just a whole bunch of general activity going on there, Chris. But thankfully, we were doing a lot of activity in the office too, as the run up to TrueNAS 25.10.1, the first point release for Goldeye. We're right on the cusp of releasing that one. We are expecting that to go out the door sometime in this upcoming week of December the 15th. We've got quite a list of items that have been fixed and improved to round out our calendar year. So how will we sort of dissect this one for a bit, Chris? Let's dive into some of the real highlights.
We may have been gone from the show. It doesn't mean work didn't stop, stopped on TrueNAS side. A lot of stuff was happening in the run up to the .1, and there's a ton of fixes, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. There's a lot of good things here. I'm sure if you're already running 25.10 or have been waiting for the next update, this is probably going to be very relevant and interesting to you. So I guess first up we want to mention is there was some issues fixed around storage pools that appeared to be offline after upgrading to 25.10. Basically, any systems that experienced temporarily messing a VDEV that required a system reboot to restore pool access, that has been addressed and fixed. That's a good one. That was probably one of the higher profile ones to get in.
Yeah.
And then next up, the ever-growing battle of making Mac behave better with SMB. So we added a new SMB Mac-specific media share profile, which will appear in the dropdown. So when you create your SMB share and pick what its purpose is, this will now appear as macOS Media Share. It's optimized for media and entertainment workflows, including things like Final Cut Pro, LogicPro, Motion, Compressor, all that good stuff. There'll be information about that in the docs if that's you.
Yeah, that one's a little bit challenging because Apple really, they only reluctantly work with non-Mac OS server solutions. There's lots of different things that they'll say, and some of them function to different degrees of success and others, but really it's they would rather you be using a Mac OS server on the other end of the pipe. And we're trying to do the best we can to, emulate and overcome any of those limitations and hesitations on the Mac OS client's part. While we're in the SMB world, we've also added some automatic validation for those of you with audit logging configured. What you're going to notice first and foremost on this is that if you have auditing enabled on a share with TrueNAS 25.10.1 and you change one of the groups that you're auditing to be invalid, so you delete it, you rename it, you take it out of being an SMB type, it's actually going to disable the entire share rather than allow a misconfigured audit setup that could cause you either a security or a compliance issue. And it's going to raise an alert for you right on the front end of the dashboard to identify the affected share and the problematic group. Again, this is only going to affect you if you're using SMB auditing. So don't worry that, all of a sudden you're going to have to be, acting like cut the red wire or the blue wire when you go to change a group or an SMB configuration in TrueNAS in general. This is specific to those of you who want that, compliance level auditing on your SMB shares.
That's very much an enterprise use case. And in enterprise use cases where auditing is concerned, you have to do it right. Again, it's a compliance thing for legal reasons a lot of the time. So we cannot allow misconfigurations or somebody to kind of shoot their foot off here. We have to be very careful. Related to that, there's things people have to pay attention to when you set up auditing for the first time. Don't set up an auditing profile where you have all the groups enabled by default, and then go and run some scanner on your client side, which is, say, walking the tree and looking at every file every few seconds, or, every so often to go and check for virus detection, all that good stuff, because that's just going to bloat and fill up your audit logs. So pay attention if you're setting up auditing in the background. Again, know what your clients are doing. Pull things out of the audit logs that are noise and are not relevant. You want to try and get to the real meat of what's going on with your users on the network.
Yeah, if you have a file-based backup program that's going in and saying, hey, every so often I'm going to go in and, read the last access date of every file, you could probably exclude that one from auditing or have it use its own audit configuration there rather than having TrueNAS be the one that's doing it.
It's a great way to blow up your audit logs to unreasonable sizes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
then on the other side here, so getting into the API, we had some REST API changes now. We're going to display an alert when REST API endpoints are accessed. This is, again, our ongoing effort to remind folks that if you're still using legacy integrations that need migration to WebSockets, to pay attention to that and make sure you take care of any that are still potentially running on your network or any custom scripts you've written. As a reminder, the REST API was deprecated fully in 25.04. The removal, though, is slated for the next release, 26.04. So we try and give about a year window when something big like this happens. And we're right smack dab in the middle of it now. So again, we're just doing the extra work to remind folks, if you have custom scripts, please go take a look at the new API page, which is at api.truenas.com. It's very simple and easy to use. I think we discussed this in a previous episode, Chris, on how this is a great actual way you can use AI to like help you rewrite your scripts and point it at our API documentation and go. So please update your endpoints.
Yeah, I've been working with a couple of outside developers as well on getting things refreshed or, built from scratch on querying those APIs. There's lots of great functionality in there, and we have some people using it in some very creative ways to do actions that you wouldn't expect to be doing through, a WebSocket call. But there's lots of exciting things that can be done there. More things that are probably useful in an enterprise context. We've added a clear configuration button for directory services. As anybody who has worked with any kind of those directory services, whether it be active or other, sometimes there can be challenges there if you have troubleshooting or reconfiguration that needs to be done. This is basically just a solid way to easily clear out the directory services config on TrueNAS itself, allowing you to sort of do troubleshooting, switch between your directory services, do a refresh if you're overhauling your domain controllers and something's stuck in there that just isn't right. Clear out your configuration, you can rejoin, and you should be good to go. We've also got some Samba fixes in here as well. We just did a little minor version bump. 422.5 went to 422.6. This is once again including an upstream fix for macOS. It's specific to time machine backup failures on macOS. I think it's 15.2 and later because of, I think it was directory rename operations on open files. Notably, this was something that didn't affect 25.04. It was something that affected 25.10. So this will be corrected in our new point release in 25.10.1.
Great. Now on the VM side, we got a couple important fixes here for people running VMs on their TrueNAS box. So first up, we fixed Windows 11 virtual machine TPM persistence. There was a situation where BitLocker pins and other TPM data was getting reset after every VM restart, which is annoying to say the least. Users needed to reset their pin every time. Now you'll need to do it once, and then it'll persist forever again. So again, please grab the .1 if you're running any kind of Windows or TPM system. Again, set it that one more time, and then it'll persist across reboots. And then similar, we had a secure boot fix that went in for virtual machines as well. Resolves an issue where VMs with secure boot enabled were failing to boot signed OSs like Windows 11. We were missing some Microsoft keys in the OVMH firmware that we ship. So that's been corrected now, and those will be recognized out of box, and you won't have to do anything special. And then last but not least for VMs, well, actually, no, we got a couple more here, Chris. Excuse me. A few good ones around VMs. We have fixes to the image file upload location. So by default, if you didn't select, it was trying to save them to the boot device, which may not be very large on some people's systems. So that's been prevented now, and it'll make sure we upload to somewhere in the storage pool. And then the next VM setting was fixed VDI disk imports specifically. There was a bug importing those type of disk images specifically. That'll be good to land as well. Nice to see people using that, though.
Yeah, that's a VDI. Is that that's VirtualBox's default? Is that what they store it as?
I think so. Yeah. VMDK for VMware. VDI, I think, is VirtualBox's default.
Yeah, it's just so long. VDI was virtual desktop infrastructure, so it's not that one. It's the other VDI. It's lowercase VDI in this case.
Oh man, one of the meetings I was at last week, somebody had a acronym. They were trying to redefine API for something as like a business process, and I was like, stop redefining common. Anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think they're going to get a little bit of resistance on that one from anybody in an engineering
absolutely.
role. So we've also improved some error handling. So both for some legacy FreeNAS dataset properties. So this is one for those of you who've been upgrading all the way from back in the FreeNAS days. If you're getting errors that talk about an ACL mode and failed to get property when you're editing a dataset on a long running system, it might contain an invalid ACL mode from a legacy FreeNAS version. So basically, this update, we're going to get better error messaging to identify the affected data sets. And if you do encounter this error, we're going to give you the command that you run. Basically, you're going to set the ACL mode to pass through on the whole data set. It's going to reset it to a valid value, and then you'll restart your system and everything will sort of be recached properly. It'll work there. We've also improved the error messaging for pool operations. So you're going to get clearer error messages and notifications when you're attempting to extend a VDEV or replace a disk. And you have some other condition like you've manually set a ZFS checkpoint from the CLI or something else that's going to prevent you from doing that extension. Again, it's trying to give you that better clarity as not just saying, hey, this operation failed, but this operation failed and here's why. You have an underlying condition in your pool that prevents it from working. You've tried to do a VDEV removal, and even though this device is a mirror, you've got RAID Zs elsewhere. So, here's the kind of explanations. More and more clarity. Again, if you see something that's like a generic error message like that, that's something that you can even submit as a documentation improvement to us to say, hey, this is unclear. Here's what I was trying to do. And it just said generic error. That kind of thing, we really try to wrap those errors around something a little bit more clearly communicated whenever we can. Exactly. We're trying to avoid, the blue screen with the hex code kind of thing. That doesn't help anybody. It's like, hey, here's a hex string. You can Google it and you won't find an answer. We'd rather do the translation for it to be like, hey, this failed because of this particular reason.
So calling back to that ACL property, that actually was a remnant of the FreeNAS release that shall not be named way back in the day. The FreeNAS 10.
Don't talk about that one.
Yeah, we don't talk about that one here. But anyway, interesting. That had lasted a long time before we found it, but it's neat to see there's some users still with really old configs out there. All right, next up, we have some fixes to Rsync tasks using SSH with keychain credentials. So there was an error that prevented running some SSH-based Rsync tasks. That has been corrected for the .1. And then some improvement to the replication error messages as well. Again, going back to what you just said, Chris, about giving people more human understandable error messages so they know what to go troubleshoot. Same thing here with replications. If a replication failed, we're going to try and interpret that for you so you're not sitting there looking at a Python traceback and trying to understand what went wrong, where do I go start debugging? Yeah, tracebacks are great for us on the development side to go look at, and we want those details, so please include them if and when you ever see them. But yeah, to help you kind of do self-troubleshooting, we try and wrap it in something a little more friendly.
Yeah. Now, speaking of error alerting, we have a fix for email sending after upgrading to 25.10. So basically, it's when you're trying to do test emails or system notifications, it's basically resolving an error where, a string attribute doesn't have or a string object doesn't have the decode attribute. Again, if you happen to be looking at doing email sending, shameless plug, you could try out TrueNAS Connect and see if you're able to do that and wrap your emails around that feature. Again, that's available directly in the Foundation Edition. Come on, give it a shot. But if you don't want to, if you want to use your own, SMTP server, this should resolve that email sending error for you. And then
I just got a nice wrapped TrueNAS Connect email the other day from some of my systems. Just like, oh, that was really nice. Here's the system with an alert. These other systems alerts have been cleared. Done. Very convenient.
So we got a couple more here. We got one more. So we're restoring the hard drive temperature data over SNMP queries. So basically, those would return empty values after the upgrade to 25.10. Pretty simple fix where we just sort of got that one resolved, and now they're going to start returning their data correctly again. And then last but not least, we fixed an issue on the user accounts page. So basically, when you unchecked the SSH and the shell access, it would suddenly, if for some reason it would disable the save button, where it's like, it would think, hey, you're not granting this user any access at all. So we've corrected that. So you can, in fact, continue to disable SSH and shell and basically just have these, very kind of null user accounts that they're just there if you want them. They won't really have any access. Maybe you want them to be API only. And, you can now make that a possibility.
Man, as much as we discourage people from using SSH in the shell, that's bad on us. We made that hard for you to go disable. But anyway, glad to see that's fixed. Yeah. Well, So first of all, we should say that's just the small kind of list of what's coming in the .1. There's a whole slew of other much more minor fixes coming. So it's shaping up to be a pretty solid release. Kind of nice, great Christmas present to get that out right at the end of the year before people start heading out for the Christmas holidays. And then we come back in the new year getting ready for betas for 2604. Which, speaking of that, real quick heads up, anybody running the Nightlies, we just merged the Linux 6.18 kernel. So people who have specific hardware challenges or need a newer kernel to test out with some new hardware, that's now a thing and available in the Nightlies. That went in, I think, yesterday. So that's very, very fresh. Please test that if that's you and let us know if there's any feedback you have.
Absolutely. So look for the full release notes when it comes out. Again, with the new Goldeye update page, you'll actually be able to see some of these highlights right in the UI, along with a deep link to your full release notes and any notifications and alerts. So if you want to get in on that, should hopefully be dropping just next week, the week of December the 15th at some point. Look for that. And, we're excited to bring this to you. We want to hear your feedback on it as always.
Great. Well, we had some other fun news over the November month. Chris, what happened?
Oh, well, something happened. I think Valve learned to count to 3, but they did it with their hardware. So, of course, everybody was more concerned about the fact that they actually released something in 3s. But this is of special interest to, you especially, Chris, because it's a lot to do with, Linux being introduced to the broader desktop audience, especially in the gaming space. Now, the Steam Deck has been doing extremely well, for what it is. People like to say, it's still it's a bit of a niche market, but it's a niche market that's been dominated by a Linux powered handheld device. So that's the real reason Steam on Linux numbers are going up and, growing, and why there's more people running that than, say, Mac with Steam these days. Was it 3 or 4%, somewhere in the middle of that now?
Somewhere in that,
Linux?
Which seems small, but you got to understand how big that is to even carve out 3 to 4% out of that dominant Windows space. That's huge. So, of course, Valve has followed on what we're referring to as their new console entry, really, the Steam Machine, which is essentially a little PC in a nice little form factor. But the cool thing for me is, again, it's running Linux. So this is another just, hey, maybe this adds a few more percents to this. It's now Linux is opening the door to gaming as viable. There's really only a few holdouts of major mainline games that don't run on Steam OS with Linux, with Proton and all that. Usually some of the guys that have really rigid anti-cheat software that needs kernel level things that only happen on Windows. Hopefully that over time gets fixed and changed, and we see some of those more mainstream maps. I know my kids love to do Roblox, and then I can move them over.
Just Roblox or Fortnite or things like that. They're right in the kernel level for their anti-cheat. What the other thing that I'm really excited about is the Steam Frame, which is an ARM-powered, virtual reality headset. But that's been done before. So why is that exciting? Well, because what Valve has done is they've done a lot of investment into, x86 translation onto ARM hardware. They're saying, you'll be able to run your, not only your Linux games, but your Windows-based games that are designed and compiled for x86 on an ARM on Linux platform. That's quite a few layers of translation. And if they're saying that this is fast enough for not just gaming performance, but virtual reality gaming, which has some very low latency requirements because of the, inherent risk of getting motion sick. If you have, latency and turning your head and you turn your head and your image doesn't follow you, it's a recipe for, a real quick run to the, looking for ginger and gravel or something. Because you're not going to
that's more your bag. I can't do any VR because I get so stinking motion sick regardless. But
for me personally, this means, the potential to abandon Windows myself as well, because the last thing that was keeping me on Windows was, again, VR gaming, because I have some specific hardware requirements. My wireless transmitter card does not have a functional Linux driver. So if I can replace that with, a Steam Frame with its own little dongle that is basically using, I think it's Wi-Fi 6 to send it across. And if this works with, proper foveated rendering and all of the other wonderful goodness that they're saying, hey, that might be the end of Windows on my gaming desktop as well. But in general, this could mean that there's a lot of work being done on this, x86 on ARM translation. This could lead for, better battery life, because a lot of ARM processors tend to have, especially in the idle department, way better battery life. It could mean just better, Linux on ARM support for those of you who bought, a Snapdragon X1 laptop or something that was running Windows, and you say, I really want to run Linux. There's been a lot of progress made on, I think it's Ubuntu 25.04 was the one that made major strides for Linux on ARM. But if we're getting, Valve's additional support behind this with their, I think it's Lepton is what they call their stack there. They got the little frog icon for it.
Mm-hmm.
It just means a lot more things. And it's, it's throwing open the doors for a lot of potential to get Linux out there on, the desktop, the handheld, the portables, just a much broader market for it. And I'm sure everybody is, we see an article every day about how, this particular Windows update is breaking something or wedging something else into AI. Like I saw Copilot pop up in my Notepad bar. I'm pretty sure I want Notepad to be there when I need to strip formatting from my text, not when I want to add a bunch of it.
I'm not composing things in Notepad. I'm just removing things or looking at a log file. Geez, get out of the way.
Exactly. I want fixed with text and nothing else. I don't even have word wrap turned on in mine. Why do I want Copilot in there? Get out.
Man. Well, I think in general, it's interesting because we're seeing, again, some more ARM relevance in the desktop and laptop space. I think, again, this is happening outside of the Mac ecosystem, too, with Snapdragon-powered Windows laptops. So over time, I think this is going to become more and more interesting, which is how do I run all these legacy apps, games, et cetera, that were designed for, x86 platforms now on my ARM device. And this also could be interesting for the Mac version of Steam down the road. Who's to say they don't have a bundle of that with Proton and then the x86 emulation as well? So now all of a sudden Mac and Linux are both viable alternatives to running all that huge catalog of gaming, that 25-year of back catalog that everyone wants to keep and be able to go back and revisit. That could really open the floodgates away from this idea that you have to have a Windows desktop to be a serious hardcore gamer. So exciting news. Again, there's a lot of neat stuff happening in this space. It's something we're going to keep an eye on. Of course, we've talked in the past about having TrueNAS ARM builds. I think that's going to become more interesting and relevant down the road as well. Today, it is still kind of a science project, which is cool, but that's how all ideas start. They start off as a science project, and over time, they gain mainstream acceptance and relevance, and then it just becomes the thing. So we'll keep an eye on it. This is a space I'm particularly interested in. Obviously, Chris, you are on the VR side as well. So I'll take your word. You'll have to vouch for that side. I ain't testing that, but I will absolutely be testing all the latest Proton things and maybe throw Steam on a Mac down the road if that becomes a thing.
Well, I'll definitely have to try it out. I mean, right now it's probably cheaper to buy, the entire Steam machine or a Steam frame than it's going to be to buy another 64 gigs of RAM to build another gaming machine to test it out, unfortunately.
Well, you have to trade your car in to buy new RAM these days.
Pretty much, yeah.
We'll give you great trade-in value on that Hyundai, and you can get 2 sticks of memory.
When I saw the line that said financing available under a RAM kit at my local Best Buy, it was just kind of like, oh no, here we go again. We all survived the GPU price hikes, and now we got to live through the RAM price hikes. So hopefully we can come back to reasonable and attainable. But it's some trying times for those of you in the gaming and the high-end compute space, certainly. So we're suffering along with you. Well, I think it's time to go into some Q&A here, Chris. We've had a bit of it pile up over the past month, so we'll pick a few of the heavy hitters, and we'll try to keep sort of picking through these as we go. So we've got Private J5C coming in, who says, I would love a simple GUI-driven way to install OpenVPN and WireGuard clients in some way that I can set up split internal interfaces that I can just bind to apps while installing them. I found some guides of sorts, but I sort of struggled in the Linux and TrueNAS environment. So what do we think? Do we have a way to get maybe help out here?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And it's one that's come up here as a topic internally on the TrueNAS development side for sure. Over the past several years even, when WireGuard became a bigger thing, do we integrate that? Does it become a native part of TrueNAS? The issue for us to go just full hog doing this is it doesn't have a lot of enterprise relevance for us. Specifically, most enterprises, they have their own VPN solutions, and that's what the IT department runs and controls, and they're not going to be doing VPNs directly to a storage device. Where this is relevant, of course, is more of the home lab community. So not that it's not important, it's just we got to find the time among the other million things on the roadmap that makes sense to do. Where does this one fit in the ranks? So technically, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of us TrueNAS fans internally here who may want to consider seeing this down the road, but nothing we can commit at this time. Again, keep making noise about it. It's not something that's going to go away. I think the ask is always going to be there on the home lab side. And the question is, do we eventually make that jump and go and add WireGuard directly in as like a native interface you can spin up? That way you can then assign it to apps and do all that kinds of good stuff. Not that you can't kind of make some of those things work today with the WireGuard app, but again, you'll have to do some hoop jumping.
Yeah, it's a little bit challenging. I mean, because of the Cloudflare outages, I actually shifted over to putting up WireGuard clients at my my in-laws and my parents' house, and actually have them set up as like doing NAT translation. So from their perspective, they're now hitting a device on their local network, and I'm just shuttling it all on the back end over a WireGuard tunnel back to mine. So when they're doing their image or their time machine backups, if they think they're hitting a local device, it's shuttling it over fiber to me, and it's just landing on my TrueNAS system. So it's one of those things where it'd be interesting to have it integrated into the UI, but at the same degree, I'm kind of looking at it as like, do I want native VPN straight on my core storage? Something about the security background in me gives me a bit of an uneasy.
You got to do it right. If you're going to do it, you got to do it right, and then you got to support it forever. That's again why we just don't go and implement something willy nilly, because we have to be able to look at the long term. Like, what's the support footprint for this? I think I wrote a guide. Was it earlier this year, beginning of this year, maybe last year, on how to go ahead and host your own services. I'm using Tailscale for that. Of course, you can substitute that with WireGuard in this case, but similar setup, Chris. I just hand out some Tailscale credentials to the handful of folks I want to be able to reach certain services, and for them, it just appears like it's local, whether you're on your phone, out and about, or at your house. So there's lots of ways to kind of skin this cat, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have a CidiousX says, looking forward to testing kernel 6.18 on my test box soon. Well, hey, you're in luck. As I mentioned, you can now go test that. We'll look to grab a Battlemage card here also. Again, test it. Let us know how that goes. Chris, what do you think?
Well, you said the magic word, which is Battlemage. I mean, I'm interested in the rumors of the big Battlemage coming, the B770 or whatever it is. But I'm really interested in that little guy, that B50 Pro. And I know I've seen quite a few people in the TrueNAS community who are interested in that one. That is their, half height, double slot wide, I think, blower style card. It's got 16 gigs of VRAM, and it doesn't require supplemental power. So it makes it a good fit for a lot of these, builds that people are doing. But one of the key things that I have sort of been working with and trying to determine if this is truly the stopping point is it might actually be the lack of resizable bar support on a lot of my test platforms. Apparently, while the old ARC A series Alchemist and the i915, that legacy driver, while it would work without resizable bar, and you did have just basically some 3D kind of performance suffer with that, you could still do things like video decoding. It didn't really put a lot of strain on the PCI Express bus. But the XE driver, which is required for the Battlemage and the later Celestial cards, so if you're picking those Panther-like platforms and really on the cutting edge, apparently it requires resizable bar to even work with video decoding. The driver is just very strict about it. So when I was getting all those faults earlier on in the year when I was testing my B580, apparently it was just down to your platform needs ReBAR, or even libVA is just going to seg fault on you. So I was looking around at various forums on this. Ended up, I think it was the Jellyfin's GitHub, where I finally landed on somebody pointing this as the potential root cause, and it looks like that might be the case. So the short version of this is, if you are considering a Battlemage card for your TrueNAS system, you probably want to check and validate. We'll see if somebody out there has one. Make sure that you have resizable bar support in your BIOS or your UEFI. There are ways that people have found out to sort of hack it into existence if it isn't present out of the factory. But that's something that's, a little bit outside our lane about hacking that in. So we want to sort of check in on this. If I can find an answer out for you that's definitive, we'll come back, we'll update this. I'll put a little note in, or, have the editor throw something up on screen like, yes, that is the limiting factor. But, we're hoping that this will get resolved with kernel 6.18, a lot of it. But if it truly is sort of a hardware requirements, and it used to be it was encouraged and now it's required, we'll just have to kind of have that caveat out there for, if you're choosing a video card for your TrueNAS system, if you pick NVIDIA, here's your limitations. If you pick Intel, here's your limitations over here.
Do your research before you go and plop money down on anything at the end of the day. All
That's
right,
the
next
challenge.
up from GReaper. I got sick of the smart errors myself. I had so many of them on a drive once. I took the drive out, stuck it into my Windows machine via a dock, and ran the vendor's smart diagnostic, which showed all good and clean. After that, the smart alerts just became an aggravation. Again, we've heard similar things from others as well. Not an uncommon story at all. As for spin down hard drives, he said, I don't spin my drives down. However, if a drive is assigned to a hot spare, it should be powered down until it's called on for duty.
Well, that would
What's
make
the
it a
obvious
cold
response.
I would just say that would make it a cold spare, wouldn't it? If it's not spinning and it isn't powered on, because one of the challenges with drives, I mean, is you tell it to power on and start working, and it doesn't. That's usually the most common failure that you observe with your drive. Is you say, "Hey, apply power on, spin up," and it goes,
What?
"Nope."
Right.
You know, I'm dead. My spindle motor's toast, or my head is jammed and a magnet failed, and you just get that wonderful sound of, you know, your head scraping across the platter, and you go, well, that drive's cooked. It's done. But regarding, you know, both sort of the smart and the spin down thing, I mean, we've gone on smart before about, you know, how it's not exactly perfectly reliable. The spin down thing, I know people are concerned about that. They're saying, hey, how come my drives don't spin down? I think we covered this in a previous episode as well, where we say we generally discourage you from spinning your drives down. We know that it is a use case for some of you, and you're welcome to hack it into working, but it's not really something that we're gonna consider for
we
support
don't encourage
going forward.
it.
We don't encourage it.
Practice.
So in our best practices, we're saying, hey, keep your drive spinning, keep your drive spinning, keep the airflow moving across them. That's kind of the thing. And I mean, again, a drive that is not actively spinning and ready to receive I/O is, well, it's not a hot spare anymore.
That's it's a cold spare. Unplug it or just leave it halfway insert. Yeah, like there's all kinds of ways to deal with that. If you truly want a spare, you know, I've had them just kind of sticking half out and just shove it in and go when you're ready to fire it up.
But if you are going to do that, if you are going to do that and you have your spare drive, hey, give it a little burn-in test first. Hit it with bad blocks, do some kind of I/O to it, right to the entire, you know, LBA space of that drive. Because the last thing you want to do is say, you've had this drive set aside for the metaphorical rainy day, you need to call it into duty, you slide it in, and it starts writing data and then immediately starts throwing bad sectors on you. Hard drive failure curves, and pretty much all storage failure curves, or almost every computer component, they look like a bathtub. They have that high edge of initial failures, they drop down, and then there's a long run up until they start gradually climbing up to fail from old age again.
Good stuff. Well, excellent. We had a lot of good content this week. And again, apologies for the long delay between episodes, but we have a good one to kick off December here. And next week, we're going to do a little bit of a special as well. We'll tease it. We're going to have some new things to show from the upcoming Icefish release coming in April of this next year. So excited to get into that.
Icefish, you jumped.
Sorry, Half Moon. I jumped a whole release ahead. I'm already thinking 6 months beyond that. Half Moon.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to show us things from Icefish, that will definitely be a, you know, subject to change at this point. We're we're still nailing that one.
We'll hold those for another day.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks everybody for tuning in today. Again, we apologize for sort of the long hiatus. It certainly wasn't planned on our part. It just the stars didn't align for us, unfortunately. But we will be back next week for another episode. As always, please get your questions and comments in the comment section below. Please do those usual YouTube things for us. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel. Do ring that notification bell because we will be back next week. And Chris and I will see you again next time.